A handful of southern states controlled by Republicans are scrambling to redraw their congressional maps ahead of November's elections in the wake of a landmark Supreme Court ruling that changes the Voting Rights Act.
The Supreme Court just issued a ruling on a potentially groundbreaking redistricting case that could impact, for many years to come, the power of minority voters in this country. It focuses on the constitutionality of Louisiana's congressional map and how it was redrawn. The justices determined if Louisiana lawmakers properly balance constitutional and Voting Rights Act protections.
I'm Ed O'Keefe, senior White House and political correspondent for CBS News in Montgomery, Alabama, one of the states now focused on trying to redraw its map to help Republicans hold on to control of the House of Representatives. Here's what you should know about the southern states trying to take action now.
The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision to strike down Louisiana's congressional map hits right in the heart of Cleo Field's seat.
The district was created. First of all, Louisiana's minority population, black population, is over a third of the state.
The Democrat represents the 6th congressional district, which slinks from Shreveport to Baton Rouge. But the High Court ruled the newly drawn majority-minority district was an unconstitutional gerrymander since it was based on race. Congressman Troy Carter represents the other majority-minority district in New Orleans.
It can wipe out both of our seats. We can realistically end up having 6 congressional districts with no African-American or Democratic representation.
In Alabama, Republican Governor Kay Ivey's called a special session to get ready for the possibility of drawing maps if federal courts allow them to do so.
Alabama Democratic Congressman Shomari Figures may soon be out of a job, not because he loses an election, but because his district could be drawn off the map.
People were not happy with the idea of this state legislature trying to take us back to a place where we've been before.
Figures represents most of Montgomery, Alabama, the birthplace of the modern civil rights movement. His constituents don't want the area to be redrawn into Republican-held congressional districts.
I just felt like I'd been hit by a ton of bricks. So many people gave their actual lives in order to exercise their fundamental right to vote.
Alabama Republicans, like Attorney General Steve Marshall, want the Supreme Court to reverse previous federal court rulings requiring his state to create 2 districts with mostly black voters.
Is this a Republican power grab?
No, I think what it is the legislature in Alabama being able to exercise their authority.
And Marshall, who's also running for the U.S. Senate, argues Alabama's map should better reflect the state's Republican tilt.
All our constitutional officers are from the Republican Party. It's no different than what you see in New England, for example, having a whole slate of Democratic representatives.
In Tennessee, Republican legislators redrew a Democratic district around the city of Memphis, a majority black city, splitting what had been a traditionally blue district into 3 new Republican-controlled areas. Chaos at the Tennessee Capitol in Nashville Thursday as Democratic lawmakers and protesters tried to stop legislation breaking up the state's only Democratic House seat. Yelling, holding signs calling the move Jim Crow 2.0, even burning a printout of the Confederate flag. The change follows a Supreme Court ruling last week that narrowed the Voting Rights Act. CBS News election law analyst David Becker says the ruling has this effect.
And in some cases, that's going to mean that they blanch their entire state's delegation and really minimize the impact of the minority population in the state.
Just before the Supreme Court decision, Florida moved to redraw its map, anticipating a favorable ruling.
Republicans in the Sunshine State are pushing to redraw congressional district lines to balance out changes approved last week by voters in Virginia that could give Democrats more seats.
I know the legislature's ready to go. They're going to get the job done.
Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis unveiled the new map, taking the state's 28 House seats from this to this. A far more Republican spread that could allow the GOP to pick up 4 more seats in the House.
And of course, this all began last year in Texas, when President Trump asked Republicans controlling the Lone Star State to redraw the map and give the GOP 5 more seats, potentially, after this November's election. Then California and Virginia asked voters to approve plans to redraw their maps in favor of Democrats, and a handful of other states across the country have tweaked their maps to give either party an advantage. Here's a little more on what's been going on across the country from our Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto.
So I'm going to show you this. Florida in context. You mentioned at the top Indiana and Ohio. This is notable because, yes, the Republicans could gain a seat, maybe a few more out of Ohio due to their redistricting. Indiana did not. And yes, as some politicos have reported, that's drawn the ire in some respects of the White House. Florida now is moving to redraw its districts and try to net the Republicans now maybe 3, maybe 4 seats. The issue here is that this, as apart from the Voting Rights Act, is, I'm going to show you this because I want to sort of explain what I mean by gerrymandering or redistricting. What happens is we've got, say, in this abstract, blue voters, red voters. If you draw districts where, say, for example, you take blue voters and you put them in a district where they're outnumbered by red, that's a Republican gerrymander, and you could do the opposite and say put a bunch of blue voters together with just a few red ones, and they're outnumbered as well. That's how this process works, and that is now, given the Supreme Court rulings, okay if it's partisan. And that's where that comes down, and that's one of the reasons you see all these districts and redistricting this cycle happening so much in all these states.
So then what kind of impact is this expected to have on the midterms more broadly?
So I'm going to go back to this map over here, and we're not done yet, again, given that VRA ruling. But what you've seen, we covered Texas and their redraw of the map. Maybe that nets Republicans some other states, North Carolina, and we just talked about Florida. The Democrats, quite famously, passed Prop 50. They might get a gain in California, some out of Virginia, too. So that back and forth on the political axis here means that you see these potential gains for each party. Bottom line here, this happens in part because, remember, voters tend to vote for the same party all the time. We talk a lot about swing voters, but the fact is that more than 90% of voters who are partisan are going to vote for their same party. Most Congress people get reelected when they run. So all of that, frankly, they can do this redistricting partly because those voters vote the same way every time, makes it easier for them to draw the lines.
But what happens, Anthony, when people who don't vote often, so who are not calculated or incorporated into these into polling and into statistics that we look at that give us a sense of how a race is going, what happens when they turn up at the polls?
Well, that could skew all of this. And I think the other part of this is there are assumptions made here. I'll take one example, Hispanic voters. A lot of them shifted toward the Republicans in 2024. In a lot of these districts, in Florida, in Texas, et cetera, the Republican lines kind of assume that those Hispanic voters are going to stay with the Republican Party. If they don't, to your point, all of these calculations might go the other way, it might backfire, and in the reverse with some demo groups for Democrats as well. Nothing is certain, that is for sure.
Thanks for watching. I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News, Montgomery, Alabama.